under the bright, burning lights of Madison Square Garden, an electric roar filled the air, one born from anticipation, uncertainty, and the knowledge that what the world was about to witness would not be ordinary boxing. It would be a collision of identities, cultures, and legacies. On one side stood the pride of Kazakhstan, Gennady Golovkin, the reigning and defending middleweight destroyer whose reputation was built on wreckage. 23 consecutive knockouts, a champion feared not just for his power, but for his precision, his pressure, and a cold, impenetrable calm that made opponents question themselves before the bell even rang. Across the ring stood Daniel the Miracle Man Jacobs, a fighter whose story transcended boxing itself, a survivor of bone cancer, a man who had once been told he might never walk again, now standing at the brink of his greatest challenge, staring down the most feared puncher of his era. This was not just a fight for Jacobs. It was a fight for validation, for redemption, for proof that the miracle in his nickname was earned, not gifted. As Michael Buffer's voice echoed through the rafters, announcing both warriors with the full gravity they deserved, even the commentators fell silent for a moment, sensing what was coming. The referee brought them forward for final instructions: protect yourself at all times, make it a clean fight. But the words floated into the atmosphere almost unheard. The tension had climbed beyond anything verbal. Golovkin blinked slowly, his expression unreadable. Jacobs exhaled sharply, shoulders broad and ready. The fans leaned forward, phones lifted, hearts pounding. This was the kind of night boxing was built for, where legends rise, myths are tested, and the sweet science becomes something closer to fate. When the bell finally sounded, it wasn't just the start of round one. It was the beginning of a story that would echo long after the fight was done. From the opening seconds, the world expected Golovkin to stalk forward with his trademark pressure and heavy hands. But the surprise was immediate and unmistakable. Daniel Jacobs wasn't intimidated. He wasn't backing down. He wasn't waiting for GGG to dictate the fight. Instead, he came out analyzing, adjusting, presenting angles, shifting rhythm, and refusing to allow Golovkin a clear read of his intentions. He switched stances early, floating between orthodox and southpaw, leaving Golovkin just uncertain enough to pause, to think, to hesitate. And that alone made the crowd gasp. Jacobs' jab was not a weapon of power, but of placement, darting into the guard, interrupting Golovkin's setup, forcing the Kazakh to reset over and over. Golovkin responded with that signature pressure, cutting off the ring like a hunter cornering its prey, sliding left, stepping right, always trying to angle Jacobs into a trap. But the Miracle Man's footwork was sharp, nimble, almost poetic. He wasn't just running. He was thinking, baiting, studying. Still, no amount of movement could erase the looming danger in front of him. Golovkin's jab, heavy as a power punch, began landing with increasing accuracy. Each one cracked like the sound of a bat meeting a fastball. Jacobs absorbed them, countered with combinations, and then spun away to reset the geography of the fight. The commentators were stunned. This was not the walkover so many had predicted. Golovkin's face tightened, his eyes narrowing as he began to respect the man standing in front of him. His shots were deliberate, cautious, almost too respectful at moments, and Jacobs took full advantage, turning the early rounds into a tense, tactical battle. The fans, expecting violence, were given something far more intriguing: two elite athletes conducting a chess match with their fists, each probing for an edge, each waiting for the other to make the first irreversible mistake. But eventually, in a fight with Gennady Golovkin, the moment of violence always comes, and in the fourth round, the arena felt the first thunderbolt. The fourth round opened with Jacobs once again attempting to disrupt Golovkin's rhythm, switching to southpaw, stepping wide, throwing a double jab, and circling to his left. But this time, the adjustment created danger rather than safety. As Jacobs shifted his stance, Golovkin saw the opening he had been waiting for, an angle exposed for a split second, a door cracked just enough for a puncher of his caliber to break through with ferocity. Golovkin launched his right hand like a missile, a straight, piston-like strike that sliced through Jacobs' defense and detonated on his jaw. The sound was sharp, immediate, and chilling. Jacobs' legs folded for just a heartbeat before he crashed to the canvas. The crowd exploded. Madison Square Garden became a cauldron of both terror and exhilaration. Golovkin stepped to a neutral corner with the calm of a man who had done this hundreds of times. Jacobs blinked rapidly on the canvas, shaking his head, refusing to allow the fog to swallow him. He rose fast, too fast for a man who had been broken by the punch, and by the count of 8, he stared back at Golovkin with a defiant glare. But the danger was far from over. Golovkin smelled blood. He pressed forward with an intensity that had ended so many careers, launching hooks, digging to the body, firing stiff jabs meant not to find points, but to break spirit. Yet Jacobs held. He clinched when necessary. He fought back when it mattered. He refused to crumble. And when the round ended, the crowd rose in admiration, not for Golovkin's knockdown, but for Jacobs' refusal to let the moment define him. The Miracle Man had tasted the power that had flattened every challenger before him. And he got up. He survived. He continued fighting. And in that moment, something shifted, not just in the fight, but in the narrative of who Daniel Jacobs truly was. The middle rounds became a test of identity, will, and endurance. Golovkin, emboldened by the knockdown, pressed forward with the cold persistence of a machine designed for only one purpose: to break down and finish opponents. His footwork tightened, his pressure increased, and every jab felt like a hammer trying to chip away at Jacobs' resolve. But Daniel Jacobs transformed in these rounds, not into a survivor, but into a competitor. He stood tall, threw combinations, countered with crisp left hooks, and even backed Golovkin up at moments, something almost no one had ever done. Jacobs' size advantage showed. His movement frustrated Golovkin. His stance switches continued to create illusions, and little by little, the Miracle Man began seizing small victories in exchanges, landing sharp right hands down the pipe, sneaking in body shots that made Golovkin blink, and controlling the distance with surprising authority. Golovkin remained dangerous, landing thudding jabs, sneaking in uppercuts, always threatening to land the shot that could end everything. But he was no longer the unquestioned commander. The fight had become a tug-of-war, a stylistic duel between Golovkin's pressure and Jacobs' finesse. Commentators were stunned. Fans were torn between awe and disbelief. Golovkin's corner urged him to go to the body, to break Jacobs down the old-fashioned way, but Jacobs' movement and discipline refused to give him the stillness he needed. Round after round, the fight grew more complex, more layered, more dramatic. Golovkin, for the first time in years, looked human, not weak, not diminished, but challenged by a man who refused to accept the role of victim. This stretch of the fight proved one thing: Daniel Jacobs was not just surviving a champion, he was competing with one. And the electricity in the arena transformed from confidence in Golovkin to a tense uncertainty. What once seemed like an inevitable knockout had become a high-stakes, razor-thin boxing match. By the time the championship rounds arrived, both men had been stripped of all illusions. Golovkin knew Jacobs was not going away. Jacobs knew Golovkin was not slowing down, and the crowd, sensing the magnitude of what was unfolding, rose to their feet as round 10 began, a round that showed the world exactly what Daniel Jacobs was made of. Jacobs began throwing with conviction, planting his feet, firing combinations that snapped Golovkin's head back. He was no longer just moving, he was asserting himself, demanding respect from one of the most feared punchers of his era. Golovkin responded like a champion, launching counters, digging jabs into Jacobs' guard, firing overhand rights that landed with enough force to make the crowd gasp. The exchanges were no longer tactical, they were visceral, emotional, fueled by pride and desperation. In the 11th, Jacobs landed a clean left hand that staggered Golovkin for a heartbeat, and the arena erupted with the possibility of an upset. Yet Golovkin, the consummate professional, regained his composure instantly, answering with a right hand that sent sweat flying from Jacobs' face. The two fighters stood toe-to-toe at moments, firing in furious pockets of chaos, each man determined to seize the final narrative of the fight. Jacobs' corner urged him not to stand still, to keep moving, to keep frustrating Golovkin. But as fatigue set in, Jacobs fought like a man unwilling to let the opportunity slip away. Golovkin, blood boiling with championship instinct, finished strong, controlling the center of the ring, landing jabs, stalking with relentless intention. The 12th round exemplified everything both men stood for. Jacobs throwing combinations with a lion's heart, and Golovkin pressing with the ice-cold discipline of a seasoned champion. When the final bell rang, both fighters extended their gloves, mutual respect forged in the fire of battle, and the crowd, unsure of what the judges would decide, could only applaud the incredible war they had just witnessed. As the fighters returned to their corners, both exhausted yet proud, the arena's tension swelled to its peak. The knockdown in the 4th had loomed large throughout the fight, an undeniable swing that had shifted momentum early. But Jacobs had done what few expected. He made the fight competitive, close, and uncertain. He had shown the world that he could take Golovkin's best shot, survive, and then outbox stretches of the fight with finesse, intelligence, and heart. Golovkin, too, had shown a new layer, his ability to adapt, to remain composed when challenged, to rely on craft and discipline rather than brute force alone. The judges' scorecards were announced with the slow, dramatic cadence that stilled the arena. Unanimous decision for Gennady Golovkin. The crowd erupted, part cheers, part disbelief, part admiration for both warriors. Jacobs dropped to his knees, overwhelmed by emotion, convinced he had done enough to win, or at least enough to earn the benefit of the doubt. Golovkin raised his gloves, but did so with humility, acknowledging that this was not the easy victory so many predicted. In his post-fight words, Golovkin described it as his first true test over 12 rounds, an admission that validated Jacobs' incredible performance. Both men left the ring with their reputations enhanced. Golovkin remained champion, his aura shaken but strengthened by adversity. Jacobs emerged as something greater than a challenger. He became a symbol of courage, resilience, and the unbreakable spirit of a fighter who had once battled cancer and now stood tall against the most feared man in boxing. That night was not just about who won or lost. It was about the story that unfolded, the bravery, the tactics, the heart, the skill, and the respect that echoed long after the lights dimmed. It was a night where boxing became more than a sport. It became art, survival, and history. And it became a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories aren't on the scorecards. They're in the performance that defines a fighter forever.